Okay, let's do this. When you hear Prusa, what comes to mind for you? What are your expectations for an original, genuine, whatever, Prusa 3D printer? Okay, hold on to those. For me, one, a flawless user experience. So no guesswork, no messing around and tuning things. You just unbox it, set up the software, follow the manual, and you get to printing. Two, good print quality. Like really good print quality to a point where I would say that, within the limits of current hardware of software, it's going to be as good as it gets. And lastly, three, achieving all that by not throwing the best, most expensive overkill hardware at it, but by designing things in a way that makes the most of the components they're using. I don't know if that matches your expectations for a Prusa machine. Maybe leave a comment below what yours are, but I just want to start out this review with the fact that I have very high expectations for the Prusa Mini based on me using the i3 Mark II, Mark III, the SL1 and the CW1. And the thing with those machines is, even though I have so many other 3D printers at my disposal at any time, I somehow keep coming back to the Prusa machines when I'm not looking for an adventure, but I'm just looking to print things without having to worry about slices settings or machine calibration. All that had me expecting a lot from the Mini, and well, obviously there was no way I wasn't going to end up disappointed. Spoiler, this is a great printer as is, but there are a few things that they can and probably will be improving. So, first, the user experience. As always, you can still watch my unedited live unboxing for the Mini, linked somewhere up here, but you get it as a two-part pre-assembled kit, and the assembly isn't hard or anything, but it is a bit more finicky than bolting together a CR10 style machine where you have 2 or 4 bolts that hold the vertical frame to the base, and then you just plug in the tool head and the X and Z motors. Here you also need to do some wire management in the electronics compartment, and the mechanical connection has you lining up a few bolts and hammer nuts. The manual guides you through the process. It's nothing that's impossible or even hard to do, and it's still obviously way less involved than actually building a printer from a full kit. But my expectations were that it would just, click together or something, which it doesn't. This is all right. Now, once it's assembled, printing. If you've ever used a Prusa machine, this is the exact same workflow, and I think it is one of the biggest features of any of their machines. So, because they developed their software in-house, which includes their their own slicer, Prusa slicer based on Slick3R, that just happens to work perfectly with their machines. So you install the software, Windows, Mac or Linux, it asks you which printer you have, and everything is just right there. You've got tuned materials profiles for PLA, PETG, ASA, polycarbonate, flexibles, this one, and even a bunch of specialty filaments as well. And you can use those at different quality and speed settings. Like you can choose, again, with pre-tuned profiles, not just between a fine, normal, and a coarse layer height, but there's also different tunes for those layer heights where you can choose if you want to print just a bit faster or a bit nicer. Loading the model, the slicing itself is really fast, export onto the included USB thumb drive, and it shows up on the printer with a preview image. There you go. That is fantastic. Now, for my very first print, I was running into some issues with bed adhesion, which you can see in the live stream. I tried using the textured PEI sheet to print with PLA. That's not a recommended combination, but it's exactly what I've been using on the Mark III for what feels like forever now, and I've never had an issue with it there. On the Mini, PLA prints would absolutely not stick to it, and I don't know if that's because the textured PEI was not worn in yet, or if they changed how it's made. And yes, the manual does explicitly state that you should be using the included smooth PEI for PLA, but you all know how good I am when it comes to reading Prusa's manuals. I just, expected it to work. So let's move on to print quality. And the quality you get is actually, that's on backwards. The print quality you get is actually great. As always, I was just using the included profiles, and the prints look basically indistinguishable from what my Mark III produces. which means it's pretty much as good as it gets. I tried the Prusa Mint PLA, PETG, ASA, even their polycarbonate blend, this one, and even a Shure 95A flexible filament, and if you put the prints from the Mark III and the Mini side by side, they look basically identical, which I think is quite an achievement for a machine that costs less than half as much as the Mark III. 3 filaments that stand out here. First, the polycarbonate, which is printed at a whopping 275 degrees Celsius. And that temperature is something that most printers cannot safely achieve. So when the Mini came out, a big talking point was that they had moved away from the E3D made all-metal V6 to a custom hardened, that didn't look like it was suitable for the temperatures needed for anything beyond PETG. The way the heat break looks is like in one of those cheaper Teflon lined hardens where you have a Teflon or a PTFE liner going all the way into the heater block. And because that PTFE liner rapidly degrades past 240, 250 degrees Celsius, that ends up being the temperature limit for that hardend. But this is not that. The hardend does have a PTFE liner, but it doesn't quite go into the heater block, but it stops halfway between that and the heatsink. So the PTFE itself is never going to see temperatures beyond about, I guess, like 150 degrees Celsius, even when you're printing polycarbonates with 275 degrees at the nozzle. I think this is a pretty good approach, and it works well. I've printed all the mounting parts for the Hemera on my Mendel 9001 in ASA, like this part, on the Mini, and those turned out perfectly, and the hardend liner in here still looks like new. It's probably not the most energy efficient design because you have a thick stainless steel heat break conducting heat into the heatsink, but it's mechanically, just much more robust than the V6 style machined down heat breaks. And everything past the heat break still seems to be compatible with standard V6 components, so if you want to use different nozzles, you can use any off-the-shelf ones. I gotta say, I kind of like this hardend design. The second filament to look at is this Extruder PLA, which printed absolutely horribly on the Mini, but printed perfectly fine, or at least, decently on the Mark III. Now, this threw me for a bit of a loop initially, and I went back and forth printing the same model on the Mini, then going back to the Mark III, then going back to the Mini, and it was always the same, garbage print on the Mini, good on the Mark III, until I saw what the Bowden tube looked like in the Mini, because that had the filament splitting into bits all throughout it. I guess because the Extruder PLA had been open for a while, it became brittle and sensitive to be kept under, bending stress. This is something that you quite often see on BCN3D's machines as well, where they have that long filament guide, which on top of keeping the filament bent, also uses 2.85mm filament. But on the Mini, as soon as I switched in some fresh PLA, Prusa Mint Pineapple Yellow in this case, the print turned out just perfectly. And the third filament worth pointing to is this flexible 95A. Now, of course, this is not a particularly demanding print for flexibles, but in my experience, prints with flexible filaments are most often functional parts that don't have a ton of detail. And for that, and for the speed at which the Mini was printing flexibles, it's pretty good. And that's with a Bowden extruder, which is generally not recommended for bendy flexible filaments, but the Mini's design handles it really well. Okay, last expectation of the Mini for me, a smart and resourceful design. And I think for that, this is a textbook example. Of course, you could also call it flimsy, but I would rather have a printer that is well designed and has well-constrained motion than one that looks beefy and is slopping around all over the place. So the first thing you'll notice is that it's missing, a Z-axis. So not only is it just using one Z-axis motor, but also linear guides on only one side. Now that opens up two possible ways of how this X-axis could now flop around. First, the obvious one is, gravity. It's going to push down on the arm and one side is going to hang a bit lower. Now, that generally isn't much of an issue on any printer. The Ender 3 uses the same single motor approach, and because the weights that the arm is seeing never changes, there's no random positioning error that a lack of support on the second side would introduce. Yeah, it does sag a bit just from the weight of the toolhead, but it's really not a lot, and it is repeatable and predictable. The other one, because of the lack of the linear guide on the left-hand side here, is that the arm is now more or less free to swivel about the z-axis. So, well, statically, there's no force in the printer that would, rotate that arm around. There is still the inertia from the toolhead. Now, because the toolhead is fairly compact, lightweight, and balanced front to back, that is just not an issue at all. So that is not going to happen. But of course, bumping into the printer while it's doing its thing, that is going to be something that will show up in your printed part. The Mini also has this aluminum profile supporting the top of the Z-axis rail, so that already makes it a lot more rigid than, for example, the early printer bots that just had these smooth rods sticking up from the bottom and no extra support up top. As for the rest of the printer, a lot of things are really tightly integrated now. So, for example, the entire Y-axis ends are now just a single printed part that include the motor mount, the idler on the other side, mounts for the rails, etc., instead of being an assembly of parts. So, because Prusa literally have hundreds of their own printers working around the clock to print these parts, and they're now making their own filament in-house, this is, well, first of all, probably the cheapest way for them to make these parts, and they're saving assembly time on top of that too. But also with in-house 3D printed parts, they can iterate much more quickly than having 10,000 machine parts in order that need to be used up before you can make any small changes. And the printed parts are plenty strong and accurate for a printer, plus the actual structure of the frame is aluminum profiles and actually an aluminum bar connecting everything down here. The Mini is also now using an all-new custom 32-bit board that is most definitely cheaper to make per piece than the 8-bit boards in the current i3, Mark III's, etc. But because it is an all-new system, that does mean there's more upfront development necessary to get everything to a point that's not just usable, but comparable in convenience and features to the tried and true boards of yesteryear. And still, I don't think 32-bit itself is necessarily a big selling point. I mean, it does enable many things about the LCD screen and the Ethernet port that the Mini has, but at its core, the software that's running on it currently still makes a much bigger difference. On the Mini, when you're going through the menus, let me just demonstrate here a bit. I mean, this is really smooth and all. It doesn't feel like there's anything missing in particular, but the old interface on the Mark III still seems more advanced, more capable. But that could just be because the old text display makes you feel like a hacker using it. And on the Mini, everything is just a lot more accessible. Under the hood, this is running the same proven motion system components from the Marlin firmware, but the interface on here is custom. So yeah, the screen is nice, it is a decent quality panel, and it is not a touchscreen. And I actually prefer a scroll wheel to a touchscreen for this, simply because you'll often be scrolling through lists of parts or changing values incrementally like the Live Z Adjust, and that is just a lot more convenient to do with a click wheel than, tapping 1,000 times on a touchscreen to change a value. Time will tell how long and how frequently the firmware in here will be upgraded as regular as it is now. Like right now there's a new firmware every couple of weeks that contain bug fixes and new features as well. But historically, for example, the Mark II came out in 2016 and has seen its last feature upgrade in 2019. And it doesn't look like there's much new to come, even though some of the tweaks that the Mark III is still getting would totally still work on the Mark II. So that's been a solid 3 years of firmware updates for the Mark II. And, I don't know, if this 32-bit platform is the one that Prusa will be using for everything moving forward, chances are good that, the Mini will be getting upgrades longer than that, but you never know. Why am I bringing this up? Well, there was a bit of a controversy around the Mini and its firmware, and that's that you have to physically break the board to run anything other than the signed firmware from Prusa. There's literally a physical tab in here that you have to break off to unlock that. Of course, that's not really damaging the board and breaking things, but it's a non-reversible indicator that this machine could have been running a non-approved firmware. Now, the printer is going to keep working just fine, but in case you then fry your board or your custom firmware decides to set the printer on fire or something like that, Prusa will decline warranty and liability. That's the only thing that's going to happen. Now, I can totally see how that is riling up some people because it's taking away your ability to change things in the firmware while retaining warranty, which is something that he used to be able to do. But on the same hand, I see why Prusa felt like they had to implement that features. And honestly, I don't think it's that big of a deal anyways. Most people will never flash custom firmware, and when they do, they're probably out of warranty already or have modded the printer to a point where you wouldn't really expect warranty anyway. The firmware and the hardware are still open source, so nothing has changed there, and you can still customize a lot of things about the firmware just by sending a G-code to it. But anyways, there are still a few things in the Mini that actually don't feel quite right to me. So let me bang those out real quick. The firmware is done. It's reliable, but it doesn't have the full amount of polish and finesse that I would be expecting. Networking is built in, there's an Ethernet port on the back, but that is hardly useful. Power fault detection is promised and in development, but it's not available yet. And there's little things like, yes, the printer has the hot and cool down while it's probing the bed so that it doesn't leave bits of filament all over the build plate. But why doesn't it turn on the part cooling fan while it's cooling down? That would get it cooled just a bit quicker and it doesn't cost you anything. You know, those are the little cherry on top things that I wouldn't expect from any other company, but from my experience with Prusa, it's like, you guys could have thought of that. But I'm sure by the time you're watching this, that will all have been added in a firmware update, or in the case of something like the cooldown procedure, just in a config update for Prusa Slicer. But mechanically, one bit that I'd like to see improved is the extruder. It's fine, but it's still got potential, especially when it comes to cleanability. I've had it shred filament once, that old PLA, this one, that wouldn't print right. And there were two things that I noticed. First, should there ever be filament shavings in the extruder drive gear cavity in here, they have no way of getting out. On the Mark III, things are a lot more open and you can literally see the back of one of the drive gears. Here, it's all super enclosed, like it's literally a black box more or less, and gravity has no chance of getting dust and debris out. Thankfully, with 3D printed parts, that is something that can be improved on really fast. The other thing about the extruder is that the drive gear that you can see in here is, you know, it's nice and sharp and grippy, but it's not what I consider self-cleaning. Some drive gear profiles will shed any shavings that might be stuck between the teeth when you run fresh filament through it, but with this one you have to manually clean it out if it ever gets clogged. And lastly, I think the absolutely biggest flaw of the Prusa Mini, the included USB drive. You see it's got this key ring on it, and that ring is just touching the table enough for it to rattle. You know, just every now and then. You know, enough for it to just be super annoying. You know, unfortunately, you will have to fix this one yourself. And after that, the printer is pretty silent, even though the Mark III still takes the crown for the quietest printer ever if you put it on silent mode. Okay, so I guess the one big question still is, should you get the Mini over an Ender 3 V2? Here's the things that I would consider. The Ender 3 wins on size and price. The Ender 3 wins on size and price, obviously. It's about 380 euros for the Prusa Mini and about 280 euros for the Ender. Both use Trinamic drivers, both have a similar size color screen, and the menus on the Ender even look really similar to what Prusa have now. However, on features, the Mini has the Ender beat quite easily. So things you get on the Mini but not on the Ender are auto bed leveling with a sensor. It's a manual process on the Ender. You get a flex bed. You get a hot end that can reliably print high temp materials like polycarbonate or ASA, and you get an extruder that can print flexibles with ease. You also get linear bearings instead of V wheels, and the bearings on the Mini will never need adjusting. They'll just need a drop of oil every now and then. But the biggest difference, I think, is that the Mini is an easier machine to use. The fact that you get Prusa Slicer with profiles for different filaments and layer heights that all print really well, and you get a manual and a handbook that guide you through the process of printing and even through some hiccups that you could run into, is worth a lot. Yes, you don't get to adjust acceleration, jerk, maximum speeds and all of that through the display, but honestly I've never had to do that on any of my Prusa machines because the defaults are really good already. And if you want to, you can still adjust those things in the slicer. So while the Ender is bigger and cheaper for sure, I still think the Mini makes a better beginner printer, or one that you just get for printing stuff, simply because so much of the printing experience is already taken care of for you. It's just things that you're not going to have to worry about anymore. The Ender might be a better fit if you're getting a printer as a project or for tinkering with it, but that's just up to you what you're trying to do. So overall, I think the Mini is a great machine, especially for the price. You're not going to find a more complete package of solid hardware, usable firmware, good documentation, and great software for under $400. It's $349 in the US without the filament sensor and the textured PEI sheet. You get just the smooth one. Sure, it didn't quite meet my expectations of being the absolute perfect printer right out of the gate, but hey, a man can dream, right? For me, the Mini is going to be a printer that I'm not planning on modifying. I'll just keep it as is so that I'll always know it's going to work just fine. And, I can come back to it when I need one more printer to get stuff done on. So if this review was helpful for you and you want to pick one up, check out the links in the description below to the official Prusa storefront. That would help out the channel a lot. Or if you've just enjoyed the video, do that, like and subscribe thing. And yeah, thank you for watching. Keep on making, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Yo, Joe Prusa just sent me this. Schaut aus, als ob der Mini bald Deutsch kann.